There are two words that really encapsulate much of this story for me: by stages. It is just a starting point for the coming story. It's a reminder of this call to specialness that Abram, to be Abraham, will have on the coming religious traditions of millions. And that story is told by stages. At each turn, God continues to engage deeper and deeper in this family and the promise of a future. God, in fact, in this section, promises three things to Abram in this little commitment dialogue between them. God promises descendants. I will make of you a great nation. Land. To your offspring I will give this land. Blessing. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. Fulfilling three of some very human needs. Or as Rebecca Abbott's Wright has written, not everyone needs a place where they feel they truly belong. Everyone needs family, people with whom to feel a secure sense of belonging. And everyone needs worthwhile work, well suited to each person's individual interests and abilities. And all of that likely sounds familiar to what we need and want in life, too, for good reason. This list of offerings shows us how God shows up in the middle of life with us, not only in extraordinary times. Abram is being told to leave a place of familiarity and go to a land he knows nothing about. How will he be able to find his place in this strange land? It's a question everyone who leaves home has to answer. And possibly even more relatable, will he get to a place that he can claim as his own? Will I get what I think I need and want to fulfill those same promises? In truth, Abram actually never will own land more than a field with a burying cave, which he buys at Sarah's death. So it isn't much that he will possess of this promised home. I have never been homeless in my life, and yet I am among many who have never been landowners either. And whereas there have been many places I have felt at home, it has never been mine. And maybe that is a learning that we can take from Abram's land journey as well. The promise God makes is not to Abraham or to Abram, but to the generations to come. And even that promise is made on a place that is already occupied by other families and generations. The land is never really ours. And what we call home is home to others as well. So we must live in places as a dialogue. Theologian Walter Brueggemann suggests that there is no evidence that Abram was called to conflict with the Canaanites. Rather, he was called to live harmoniously with them and believe in the promise of God by permitting the reality of blessing to be at work. Permitting the reality of blessing to be at work. Brueggemann does not associate the promise of God with the violent intentions as a fulfillment of this promise. Nowhere in God's call to descendants, land, and blessing is there a requirement that the land will be the solitary possession of the one. Maybe the whole point of Abram's call has been misunderstood for generations upon generations of followers. Maybe what is at the heart of this call to go from the land of ancestors into a land shown was to prove to the world that coexistence was possible, and we missed it. Not only did we miss it, but we as a species continue to perpetuate a status of being chosen, on others, on ecosystems, on so much more. We must not forget that the history of the United States also begins with immigrants who came as travelers following a call. Unfortunately, the Pilgrims found the occupation of indigenous communities a hindrance to their possession. This is an evil that we must hold gently in one hand when we look at Abram's promised descendants, the nations that have grown throughout time into world-dominating influences. God might have wanted Abram's story to be one that told us of coexistence and acceptance and integration, but out of fear, we created separation. Something we must continue to undo throughout our entire lives if we are going to truly seek these promises of God to us. We can hear echoes back to the stories of creation in which God makes community first, not the individual. Last week we heard in worship how our story starts in community. And that same community offers to Abram, father of faith, to descendants as numerous as the stars, as numerous as the grains of sand, a physical space already containing community. The learning to get from this blessing, this promise, this family of expectant hope is that to survive, you must continue to make community. This story is also an acknowledgement of found, created family, of the non-traditional ways of understanding our journey on this earth. To put more emphasis on this interpretation, we're told that in the previous verse that Sarai is barren, that their nephew, Lot, is going with them on this journey. God's family of abundance then begins with this seemingly alone few members of this circle, with a very important job to do, to be a channel of God's blessing to the whole world. This is a job that is still incomplete. And in honor of this generation's old call, we take up the slack and walk it ever forward. And that work is done by stages. There is no finger-snapping ease of perfection without effort. No, the work continues on step by step. The needs of the people before us today are the next step to be claimed, the next stage of action. In response to these blessings of God that Abram receives, in recognition of the travel across the land, we are told that Abram creates an altar, a habit he will do several times, marking out special places and times on the way for these promised descendants to recognize. These altars would likely look nothing like our altar we have up here. It might look more like a rock grouping or a tombstone, a marker on the way. In a tombstone, we have a marker of a place on the way too. So they make an interesting connection to this call of Abram, this life of promise marked on the journey. In our modern grave markers, we typically get a very brief times of their lives, their dates, or just a few identities, mother, sister, brother, best friend, things of that kind, right? But it hasn't always been that way. As a family, Sam and Tyla and I have been reading the Anne of Green Gables books, and in the current one, Anne of the Island, Anne and a friend are wandering through a very old graveyard that is more often seen as a park. And so they read this epitaph. Here lieth the body of Albert Crawford, Esquire, for many years keeper of His Majesty's ordnance at Kingsport. He served in the army till the peace of 1763, when he retired from bad health. He was a brave officer, the best of husbands, the best of fathers, the best of friends. He died October 29th, 1792, aged 84 years. And while I cannot imagine engraving that whole thing onto stone, the work it must have created to get that there, I can very much appreciate the desire. in previous technological ages, to tell the story of the lives of those less than royal would only happen in that tombstone. No one would have been in the business of telling regular people's stories in print, for sure. But here it stands, generations later, for Anne and her friend to explore. It tells us something about their country, their people, the family of this individual, the journey of life. And it makes me wonder at some of those small, in the middle of the world graveyards sprinkled around our state, too. Like that one on Union Deposit just past Hornerstown, containing a handful of graves almost in the middle of the road. What journeys are preserved in those slabs of rock? Who is there to remember those stories? Abram sought to preserve important moments of his travels by creating altars, places to pause and take note, places where it is thin between divine and mundane, a marker not of an end but of a part of a journey, the travel by stages that happens as we make our way in life along this meandering journey. In making the promise to Abram, God bound themselves to the journey of this man, of this family, in the new and startling way. And because of that promise, because Abram did go when God spoke, because his family found fulfillment on the journey, we become part of the promise and the hope too. Our stories tell us that God is bound to us, to our meandering roller coaster of a life, because God chose to bind themselves to one small group of people on a journey. So what binds you to God's promise today? Is it what invites you to journey onward? Is it the hope of a connection? Is it because of family relationships? Is it an expectation of being remembered? Or is it a joy of tomorrow? So let us journey by stages throughout God's extended family, in community called forward, in love promised presence, in joy building memories together. Amen.